Okay, the webinar is now live. We're just going to give it a second for attendees to come in. Okay. All right. So I think we have a bit of a queue. So.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to begin today's presentation the way that we begin all events at Georgian College, and that's with our land acknowledgement. Georgian College acknowledges that all campuses are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe include the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Georgian College is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And at this time, I would certainly welcome you to add your own land acknowledgement into the chat menu if you are joining us from somewhere outside of our catchment areas today. And so I first want to introduce myself and let you know that I'm Jamie Campbell, and I'm the manager of Alumni Engagement, Annual, and Legacy Giving here at Georgian College. And it is our great pleasure to welcome you to a session today where we've invited two of our really great alumni to join us. And so a bit about the Alumni Association. We are a family of 87,000 proud Georgian graduates around the world who are committed to improving the world around us, but also finding ways to give back to our alma mater. And one of the ways that our graduates give back to Georgian is by joining sessions like today, where they're able to share some of their expertise and experiences with you, our students. So to that end, I want to introduce two really great alumni with us today. The first is Daryl Quapas, who graduated from Georgian's CTSN program in 2008, and then graduated from the CNNSS program, which you may know as INSS in 2009. And I'm throwing a lot of letters at you, and I'm sure most of you on the call know what these mean more than I do. Daryl also has a CCNA routing and switching certification from Cisco. During his time at Georgian College, he had the opportunity to participate in co-ops with Central North Correctional Super Jail in Penetang, Hydro One in Barrie, and at Revelatory Regional Health Center's service desk. He then joined the workforce in September 2009 after graduation. After several companies, he now works at Revelatory Regional Health Center as a network administrator, where he is responsible for managing all of the enterprise firewalls, switches, core routers, wireless controllers, load balancers, and VPN appliances. And again, I'm sure that matters more to the people on the call than me. I'm not sure what I just said for the most part. And our second graduate that's joining us today is Bryan Fox. And Bryan is a graduate of the COPR Computer Programming Program, class of 2019, and is currently a Senior Solutions Engineer team lead with Deloitte. This team actually manifested out of the business value that Bryan was able to deliver when he was on his very own co-op term with the company, where he was able to demonstrate clear value for the business need. From there, he was offered a full-time position with the company before he even finished his co-op term, and now he joins us today as a proud member of that team and also a member of our Georgian alumni family. So without further ado, I will let everybody know that the call is now being recorded and will be available to you later. And I invite Jody and Jeff to take over from here. Sorry, I don't invite you to take over. I see Aaron looking at me and reminding me that I need to tell everybody to take a picture. This is why they give me the intro speech, and then they take controls away, because I'm a relationship guy. So from this end, I'm going to ask everybody to turn on your cameras if you're comfortable. We're going to take a quick group shot of everybody on the presentation, and then we'll turn the reins over to Jody and Jeff. And Aaron's going to do this for us.
Okay, one moment. I'm just trying to change my screen to show everyone. I thought I had this figured out.
And while Aaron is doing that, I'll just let everybody know that we're grabbing a quick screenshot of the call today so that we can thank Daryl and Bryan for joining us also, and we will post it to our social media channels acknowledging their support as alumni also, and we're also going to share it internally with our staff and faculty. So Daryl and Bryan, if you're not used to being celebrated, know that we're about to celebrate you.
That's good, thank you.
Yeah, it's an honor, thanks.
Sorry, and my view isn't. Okay.
Anybody know an IT person?
We'll figure it out for the end.
I don't think.
Things over to Jody and Jeff right now. Go ahead.
Sure, no problem. You know what? Don't worry about it, Aaron. Yes, as Jamie said, we can figure it out. Unless anybody has the magic bullet right now, Bryan, Daryl, you can speak up if you know what we're supposed to do. Zoom is never my friend.
I tried putting it on gallery view, but it's not.
Not coming up. That's okay. That's okay. As Jamie said, we can do it at the end. No problem at all. Thanks so much, Jamie. Appreciate that. And Daryl and Bryan, we can't express our thanks enough, but it's so great to see grads come back and alumni and just to hear their story and how you got to where you are, and that your education, and it sounds like in both cases your co-op was a part of that. So that's fantastic news to hear. And today, really what we're looking at, and a lot of the students would like to know, is a little bit about your journey. So Jamie indicated when you graduated, maybe reiterate that, the program that you were in. If you could tell us a little bit about where you did co-ops, if you did your co-ops, where you've worked a little bit since then. And again, I know Jamie gave an overview, but if you want to give a little bit more detail, and then we hope you believe your education and your co-op maybe helped to get your career started. So Bryan, Daryl, you can go, you guys can decide who wants to go first. We'll give you is 5 minutes fair, or do you need longer than 5? Because we can stretch it out if you need us to.
I think we could do 5.
We'll try.
Okay, Daryl, do you want to start? Okay,
Sure.
I can give you the hook if you need to. So, okay, Daryl, take it away.
All right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. Definitely grateful to be here. So as Jamie mentioned in my introduction there, I graduated from the CSTN program back in 2008, and I apologize if you can hear my dog whining because, I want to give a quick story. We were getting everything set up before this, and my house lost power just before this call went live. And so I had to quickly make some last minute arrangements. And so anyways, we have to deal with him whining. Anyway, sorry about that. So I graduated in 2008 from the CSTN program. And then I took the 1-year post-grad course, Computer Network System Security, which I think has now been rebranded. So I graduated from that in 2009. And then I started working at Bank of Montreal in their data center in the south end of Barrie. And I started there as a security analyst, working with a lot of mainframe work. So it was a lot of provisioning of administrative accounts on the mainframe, as well as in Active Directory, all their admin accounts. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I moved into the operations department as an intermediate applications operation analyst. And I guess the best way to describe it is we managed about 10,000 applications. So picture like an Olympic-sized swimming pool of applications, but the pool was only about a couple inches deep. So it was really first level 1 support for all of their systems and that sort of stuff. And he won't stop. I'm sorry, they just had a dog really throwing me off. I apologize, guys. So I did that for a while, and by the time I finished there, I was about 4 years into my working career, and I hadn't touched a networking switch or a router or anything like that. And I actually had applied for a network analyst position at Bank of Montreal. And I remember doing that interview, and one of the technical questions was, how do you create a VLAN on a switch? And I had never created a VLAN on a switch before, and I couldn't answer that question. And I was a little hard on myself because I didn't get that job, but I used that as a learning opportunity. And I made that decision. You know what? I went to school to become a network administrator, and that's what I want to do. And so I had to do a lot of training on my own to relearn networking, because it's that saying is very true. If you don't use it, you lose it. And so I spent many hours. I bought some equipment on eBay, routers, switches, built networks, basically retaught everything that I sort of forgotten from school, and started working for a company called Kwapis, which is a local internet service provider in the Midland area. And it was a great introduction to networking, because you would go into, it basically was like a network technician, where you'd go into like a small business, like a doctor's office, or some sort of other small organization, and you'd have like a 24 port switch and a little Cisco ASA 55.5 firewall, and you'd be setting up VPNs and all that sort of stuff. So it was great to get my feet wet, running network cables, all that sort of stuff. And then 5 months into that job, I had the opportunity to become a network administrator for a small internet service provider, again in Barrie, called Point-to-Point Broadband. So they're a wireless internet service provider, and they have a lot of wireless towers throughout the Simcoe County area. And what they do is they have a technician that will go to your house and install a subscriber module to your home, and then point it in the direction of a tower. So my job was working in the NOC, and I would be on the radio communicating with that technician to get that signal dialed in, as well as managing like the network that the traffic traversed. So I got really great experience with routing, switching, all that great stuff, like really like nitty gritty like networking skills. And I remember I was there for a year, and at the end of that 1 year, I was like, you know what, I know networking, like I'm a network admin. And then I had the opportunity to interview for the position at RVH. And I thought I knew networking going into RVH, but the amount of redundancy protocols and everything that we have now, it has just exponentially taken my knowledge from this sort of like CCNA level knowledge of networking all the way up to the CCNP and into like CCIE level of topics. So really amazing job. If you want to get into networking, it's definitely, it's everything you'd ever want. Like Jamie had mentioned in my introduction there, enterprise switches, routers, firewalls, VPN appliances, load balancers, you name it. I install it, I touch it, I remote into it, I troubleshoot it. So yeah, it's a really great career, and yeah, I'm just very grateful that my career path has taken me this far.
Great. Thanks so much, Daryl. That's a really great overview. And I know I can already see questions are coming in through the chat and the Q&A, but we'll head over to Bryan, and then we'll move forward. Bryan, over to you.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, everyone. Bryan Fox. I guess I'll just kind of start from Georgian and kind of move forward there. For anyone wondering, I went back to school as a mature student when I went to Georgian, almost a decade in the workforce at that point, looking for a real career change, being in retail sector, a bit in finance, and a lot of other things, but just really trying to find some direction, knowing that software was one of those kind of key buzz things Obama was pushing it back. And if everyone recalls kind of the news cycle, become a coder, learn the code, all that kind of stuff. So I kind of drank the Kool-Aid on that and said, okay, I'm going to give up the job that I had, put everything else on hold, and go back to school. So I got into the computer programming, and I took it incredibly seriously, as if it was a career itself, going to school. And that was kind of my mindset heading into it, not having a prior background in that. I was very fortunate to land a co-op with Deloitte in infrastructure engineering, which was completely outside of the program I was taking. And I'm not going to lie, first day on the co-op, I was like, I'm not going to last here, guys. 100% not going to make it out of this. My networking course wasn't even until my 4th semester, so that was not going to be anytime soon. I was working with security systems. I needed to handle change requests and all this other terminology. And I know in these core programs we're speaking to today, those are part of those curriculums, was not part of the programming curriculum in any sense. So it's fair to say that the first 90 days, complete nightmare and super stressed out. So trying to be forward thinking, I looked at it and went, how can I provide value to this company? So number one, they don't cut my co-op term short because I need to get this credit. But number two, the feel like that I'm not just like a body in the seat there. So I learned that, hey, they use Python within the organization. Didn't know that language at that time as well. And a lot of the work I was doing initially was around analyzing security systems, providing reports based on like event thresholds and critical exceptions that could be flowing through the system. And I would spend 6 to 8 hours building out these real generic reports. And I wasn't alone. There were other co-ops brought in doing the same redundant work. So I ended up spending most of my day. I would blast through the report, try to get it done. And then I learned Python on my spare time. And I said, how can I automate it? And within 3 weeks, I found a way to automate the report. And I didn't tell anybody what I was doing. I was just giving them the deliverables they asked for, but they didn't know that this 8 hours of work I was now completing in 2 hours of work, leaving me 6 hours of work open in the day. And I just kept on learning more about Python, more about what we are doing internally. And I started looking at more of their processes that they were doing manually and spending ludicrous amounts of time just performing all this stuff. So I ended up building a full-fledged application which would go through and run these reports, do aggregations, perform the metrics and everything. And we started to head towards the end of the co-op term, and they gave us like a little mini co-op project, and it was, to be honest, a little bit of fluff in nature in terms of the value. But what I did is I hijacked their PowerPoint, and at the end I added some additional content there. And right when they thought the presentation was going to be over, I performed kind of a Steve Jobs moment, and I said, guys, I got one more thing to show. And I went live with this application in front of a boardroom full of directors and partners of the firm, as well as senior management, showing the automation of the whole entire system. And from that point there, I was pulled out of my current position. They said, what else can we do? I was partnered with one other engineer who was working in the building, trying to find his footing as well. And we became a team around internal automations, and really this whole entire thing grew from there. I was offered a full-time contract within my first co-op term, and it just was an insane confidence booster. Before the time I even came back, I was like, you know, your life's already starting to like take a certain direction. And from that point, the rest of my time at Georgian became easy because I was dealing with these real critical business problems at work. And when I would hit the coursework, it was like, I've been here, but I've also been like 10 steps further. So it wasn't like, hey, let's take my foot off the gas though. I would work with Rich and Jared, and I would look at the rubrics and curriculums, and I would max their 100% out and then go, okay, if I was wanting to use this to push myself, what other features could I push onto this project? And my last 6 programming courses there, I scored 100% in every single course. And anything less than that was unacceptable, because you have to find this point to like push yourself. And I just got obsessed with like self-improvement. And I've kept this mindset over like the last 3 years and running, almost 4 years in September at this point. And the scope of the stuff that we're leading now, we're dealing with integrations of wide scale, what are called SOAR platforms, which like aggregate from security devices, networking logs, running playbooks for automated remediation on alerts, like just knee deep in DevOps and the automation workspace, as well as trying to find integrations between key players. It's been crazy, but honestly, using Georgian as the platform was like one of the key reasons that like this was possible. So if you're one of these students that are going there and you're finding, hey, the course is easy and you're just getting through, look at what you're doing and go, how can I step it up? What gaps can I fill? What skill sets can I cross train myself in to kind of keep going? But I guess we can go into more of it in a bit, but I guess that's kind of an intro to kind of how I got here.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Bryan and Daryl. And I think, I mean, really one of the key message, what I both hear you saying is that it didn't happen overnight. You took it in stages. And for Bryan, you came in as a mature student, but you knew what you had to do and you did it. but knowing that there was a lot of work in it. It wasn't handed to you. You had to make those stepping stones and continue to learn, not just past Georgian college, but on the job, past the job. So I appreciate that, because I think it gives students a real life picture that how much they have to put into their education, their co-op work experience, and continuing on into their career, that it can't stop. You have to keep moving. So thank you. That's fantastic.
If I could just
guess
quickly add in there
yes,
too, Jody.
Sorry, Daryl,
just
go ahead.
to what Bryan is saying, if I was to hire somebody, like I'm hiring that person that Bryan described that goes that extra 10%, right? Like why would I hire somebody who's just going to show up and meet the requirements, right? If someone is demonstrated that they've gone above and beyond, just like Bryan had described, like I'm hiring that person. So I mean, kudos to you, Bryan. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, great, guys. That's fantastic. So maybe as we move on to the next part, did both of you receive some of the learning outcomes that the students might have been working with for either computer systems technician and or the information security? Were there
Yes,
any that jumped out at you that you wanted to speak to specifically? Or do you want me to say what they are and one of you can respond? Whichever way you're most comfortable with.
I guess I'll speak to one that I see across multiple teams that holds kind of a place to my heart, and that's probably around change management. And I feel like a lot of these points kind of hone in on how important that feature is. And I'm not sure how comprehensively it gets covered through the courses, but I think it's a little understated kind of what it's going to be looking like when you move from the classroom into the workplace and you're dealing with a corporation and maybe you're executing changes that are impacting thousands of servers. They might be in production, maybe they're linked up with critical database applications too. So number one is you got to really know your fundamentals very strongly. The odds that you're going to know the specifics of any particular tech stack when you're walking into an organization, pretty unlikely, because you can try to get a lot of depth, but you're not going to have a lot of breadth, or vice versa. I find often it's better to just become really in tune with one particular piece, and then you can branch out to similar technologies afterwards. But around change management, it's just really being comprehensive about your approach. It's not the Wild West once you're in a corporation and you're performing these changes. Can you explain with a level of clarity what are the steps that we need to do to execute on any given movement? Can we list our Linux commands one by one? Is there any redundancy there? Are we thinking about all the places where things could go wrong? Is the behavior scriptable? Is there a better deployment path that we could be looking to? All these type of behaviors are what's going to like set you apart from your peers. Sadly, one of the ways that people get eliminated from this industry is not taking due diligence around changes, especially when you're working with clients of sensitive data, especially, but any business applications. So you really got to know what you're doing. But if you don't, typically you want to like look back on other change tickets that have happened in your organization. What did other people do? Very rarely are you the first person to go and perform this type of change. How many times has this failed? What hangups did the person experience? Can we articulate what that timeline is going to look like? Are we getting ahead of what the change is going to be? Are we notifying parties across various teams that are going to see any disruption? It's these forward thinking and communication skills that can be overlooked instead of just the raw hopping on the command line and just going straight at it. That part's cool and that part's important. Don't get me wrong. You still have to have those skills, but it's the things that go around it and protecting yourself, because if somebody wipes out the client database, your manager might save you once if you're lucky, but if the impact is too heavy, that they might have to let you go. But if you're in a scenario where you have a really quality backout plan, you took proper copies before you're dealing with the system, you cover as many due diligence, and you have that articulated in your change process, then you're going to succeed. And if you come into a corporation or a company and they don't have a change process, there's a leadership opportunity. Go, what can we do to put something in place to make that happen? And I think it'll do miracles for your career if they don't actually have something in place, because it's so critical.
And I could just tack on to that as well. You'll find, depending on the size of the organization that you work for, a lot of the smaller companies, you end up being sort of the jack of all trades IT person. So change management and all that stuff gets included into your role. And then you work up to the medium-sized businesses where they probably have a better change management process than the smaller size companies. And then of course, when you get to Bryan's company, the big enterprises that are globally around the world, you definitely have to have your change management to a T. And to Bryan's point, it is so important to have that plan and to communicate with your key stakeholders that are going to be potentially impacted by the change, doing your due diligence in order to make sure that you don't make a mistake. When we make a change at Royal Victoria Regional Health Center, we held the medical record not just for RVH, but also for Georgian Bay General Hospital in Midland, Headwaters Healthcare Center in Orangeville, and also Collingwood General Marine Hospital in Collingwood. So the changes that I make, every time I'm working in the data center, every time I'm doing a change during a downtime window, I'm always thinking in the back of my mind that there are 4 hospitals that are dependent upon me not making this mistake. And from Bryan's perspective, his clients could lose a lot of information in databases, but in my world, we're talking about people's lives. There were outages where it ended up being a hardware failure, but there were patients in our diagnostic imaging department with radiation flowing through their body, but unable to have the test done, and now they're just stuck sitting on this table waiting for this radiation to go through their system so that they could go home, and basically their appointment was canceled. The cancer patients couldn't receive their chemotherapy treatment or radiation treatment. So depending on the business that you're in and what you do will heavily dictate how your change management processes are. And as Bryan mentioned, like if you go for if you're in an organization and you don't see a good change management process, that's a great leadership opportunity to say, hey, like, guys, what happens if we make a mistake? Like, why aren't we documenting this? Why don't we have a schedule that says at 1 o'clock in the morning, Daryl's going to log into this router, and he's going to remove this route, and then he's going to log into this device. And like, that's a huge opportunity for you guys. So.
Great, thanks for adding on to that, Daryl. I wonder can you, because of the nature of the company you work for, and obviously it is different from what Bryan does. And so there's going to be, major differences on how you have to approach things, a little more flexibility in one company and maybe not as much in the other company. But I noticed what you were saying about, some of the application and making sure what the problems are and what the tools you use. I wonder if you could just expand a little bit more about the system approaches and maybe diagnostic tools that you might use if you encounter a problem with something you've just identified.
Yeah, absolutely. So I apologize. I had a bunch of references that were ready in my other PC, but because I lost power, I don't have that. Okay, so what's a good example that we can use here?
Even imagine what you do. And this is what I say to students. What do you do on a daily basis? And I know you can't describe in a whole day, because what you do in a day, probably is like a week for us, but we can condense it a little bit. Take an example you recently had that you can share with us. And I think that would be so. Yeah,
for sure. So I actually have several examples that have come up in the last couple weeks. So what's one example? So this is a simple example where we have the system called the nurse call system, where a patient can hit a bell and it sends a notification to the nursing station. It used to be a lighting system where you'd push the button and it would light, a light would go up above your door there, and then the nurse would see it. This solution is fully integrated. There's all these different devices that plug into a network switch. In each of our data closets, there's a network switch that is dedicated to that nurse call system, and it's very they're very, in the medical world, they're very strict on certification. So we are only allowed to install one specific Cisco 24-port switch. We are not authorized to install a 48-port switch because that would be in breach of their certification. And so the issue was we have a newer network administrator who had deployed this switch into an area because they were installing this equipment. We're still rolling it out. So he had installed the switch and did all the configuration and all that. And then the next day they wanted to go live and none of their devices were communicating with their server. And so it got escalated to me. And so what I do is you'll learn throughout your career, you'll gain a lot of experience. So I'm at a point now in my career where I can rely heavily on my experience and my knowledge. I know in my head what the system should look like. There's going to be the configuration on the switch. There's going to be a couple of VLANs that have to be created. And that's going to connect into the RVH network somehow in order for it to communicate with the server. So I know it has to plug into a switch port on one of our switches. And I know that it's a trunk port and that we need to have the certain VLANs traverse that connection. I also need to know that that VLAN needs to exist on the RVH network and route it appropriately till it gets to its gateway. And so what the issue was in this case is that my coworker had done pretty much everything right. Everything looked good in terms of configuration. On the RVH switch that connects to it, he had created the trunk port and added the VLANs that had to go across. But one thing that he forgot to do was to create the VLAN in the Vlan database on the switch. And so you need to be able, you have to create the VLAN and it has to exist on the switch in order for it to go across a trunk line. And so I had asked a couple of questions. So it's good to have certain questions to get the information, right? Like I had asked my coworker, can you see a MAC address of anything on that nurse call network? And he had said no. So I'm thinking, okay, that's layer 2. It's probably a VLAN issue. Let me map it out. I wish I had my notebook here with me, but my workbook is filled with diagrams. Like I logically map things out. So I would have like a box for a switch, and then I'd have a line connected to another rectangle to signify the connection. And then are these VLANs on this switch? Okay, yes, they are. Are they on this trunk line? Yes, they are. Are they on this switch? Oh, yeah, it's there. It's on the trunk port, but not in the VLAN in the database. So that's how I was able to troubleshoot that. There's also things where sometimes you don't have the time to figure that out. And so we do a lot of our changes during downtime windows. And on our last downtime, we had moved a lot of stuff off of some old networking data center switches over to the newer Cisco Nexus switches. And long story short, there's a server that we call the building automation server, and it manages the entire building for the facilities department at RVH. So if there's a negative pressure room, if there's any issues with that, or like a water leak sensor, like that alerts the facility staff to go and address it. So this server was down as a result of that downtime. And going back to what Bryan was saying about change management, you have to have that backup plan. You have to have that, like, if everything doesn't go right, you need to have a backup plan. And the manager at the time was a little stressed out because they had zero visibility into the hospital. And so I made the executive decision on my own to just revert the change and move them back over to the other equipment in order to get them up and running. And that would allow them to be able to continue monitoring the building and keep all of our patients and staff safe. And allowing us, the network team, some time to do some tests when your back's not against the wall. To bring a laptop and have a static IP configured and do some troubleshooting. And what we realized is that there was a layer 2 issue with VLANs. There were some VLANs missing on some trunk connections, as well as, what was the other issue? There was a couple issues. So there was a couple things, but it allowed us that time to be able to troubleshoot it and test and be like, why doesn't this work, right? Without having that pressure of trying to get the system back up and running.
Wow.
I
That's
have
all
more.
I can say. But really, I think what I really hear from that is that you had an alternate plan, and in order to be able to get to the real solution of it, you had to revert back to your alternate plan. So keeping everybody safe, of course, thank goodness for that, because I use RVH too, so we're really glad about that. But also you're mapping it out, and I think that if there's one thing I realize as I work with the computer studies students is that really is key, is to kind of have that. And I've heard Bryan say it in change management, is that you have to kind of go through those steps, because depending on where the problem is depending on how far down you're going to have to go to those layers. So fantastic.
Yeah,
Thanks so much for describing that, Daryl. That's great.
Uh-huh.
Do either of you have another outcome that you maybe wanted to address? And if you don't, I can read off a couple and you can kind of respond that way. I wasn't sure if you had picked out some specifically that you wanted to provide an example to, whatever you're most comfortable with.
So for myself, I was planning to share the story of the worst day of my career at RVH.
Please do.
That's,
Please. We
that-
would love to hear that, because Bryan has told us how for 90 days he was in turmoil and basically didn't know if he was going to make it. So you know what? I think this is fitting. Absolutely.
Okay, so this, Jamie, I don't know if you would remember this, but so I can't remember what year it was. About 3 or 4 years ago, maybe, our RVH hit the news because we had a major outage that took out all 4 hospitals. And the best way to describe it is it was the recipe for the perfect storm. So what had happened is we had a staff member at RVH who wasn't an IT person. So it wasn't, they didn't know what they were doing. They probably should have called IT in the first place. That would have resolved the issue. But this individual had moved an IP phone in a training lab. And I don't know if the students are aware of what's in an IP phone, but there is a little switch in that IP phone. So essentially you could have your laptop or your device plug into the phone with a network cable, and then have the other network, have a second cable coming from the phone to your network jack. So essentially you can have an IP phone and a desktop sharing that same connection, because the IP phone has that switch. So for all the networking students here, if you know how switches operate, when a switch receives a broadcast packet or frame into it, what is it going to do? It's going to flood that packet. I keep saying packet, it's layer 3, but it's going to flood that frame out every single port except the one that it came in on, right? And so with a network loop, like it just infinitely loops and loops and loops forever until if you don't have the proper protection mechanisms in place, that traffic just loops infinitely. And then eventually you run out of resources on your network switch and it stops working. It stops processing traffic and everything, and it goes down. So what had happened is this individual thought that one of the cables went to the network jack and one of the cables went to a PC, because she was having issues with the PC. And so she plugged 2 live network drops into an IP phone. And we use spanning tree BPDU guard, which is a protection mechanism that says that, hey, if you see the same BPDU that the switch sends out on a port, if you see that, like kill that port, put it into error disable mode so that it blocks that traffic. Well, it turns out that both of these drops did not have that configured, but we had it configured everywhere. It just so happened that it somehow was missed on both of these ports. And what was happening is it would take out the entire network. So at this time, we had a different network design. We had what was called a collapse core design, where all of our data closets, they all terminated to two core routers. And then that's how you got to the data center. That's how you got to anywhere else. We since then revised it, and we have a much more redundant network now. So what was happening is this switch was being looped because of this IP phone, and it was taking up all the resources on our core router. And what was happening is that the IP phone would just spin and spin and spin, this like vicious like cyclone of all this broadcast traffic, and the phone would die, and then it would shut down. So it would turn for 15 minutes, phone would die, and then it would stop because the phone reboots. And so as the phone's rebooting, the loop stops. So everything works. And then for 15 minutes, everything's good. And you're like, okay, I think we're good. And then it happens again because the phone boots up and it starts doing what switches do, right? And it was so hard to find. It was like finding a needle in a haystack. And we had multiple tickets open with our vendor. We weren't always a Cisco shop. We used to have a lot of Brocade equipment. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Brocade, but they don't exist anymore, which is part of the reason why we're all Cisco now. So we had tickets open with their engineering department, with their MLX department, which is the name of our routers, their FCX department, which is their edge switches. We had tickets open everywhere, and we were escalated all the way up to the top. It took us 3 days to figure out where this loop was. We very quickly, very fast knew which section of the hospital it was being affected by, because at that time, like I said, it was an MLX chassis as our cores, and they have different modules, and we knew which module went to which closet, and so we were able to narrow down where it was, but then we couldn't figure out this problem because the phone kept rebooting, and it just like you'd have the information, and then the phone reboots and it would go away. Anyways, it took us 3 days. We hit the news. We were all over the news that we were down. We finally figured out that it was a loop, and we removed the IP phone, and we ended up taking that department down over the entire weekend. So that department had to resort to the old way of doing things with pen and paper, because the leadership and executives at the time thought it's safer to have that one particular unit down over the weekend, so that the rest of the region, all the other hospitals, can maintain a stable environment. So it wasn't until the next week that we had done some health checks and investigating just to make sure everything was good before we brought that unit back online. And I remember like just coming in that day, and it's like the phones are off the hook, the service desk is just lighting up with calls, and people are just it's almost chaos, right? Like nobody knows what's going on, and and I'm sure Bryan might have had a moment like this, but you get that moment where you're like, oh my God, like I don't know what's going on, and I'm the guy that has to fix this. Like I really, I don't want to swear, but it's like an oh crap moment, right? Like I'm sure if you guys get into networking and into IT, you will have that moment in your career, and I hope you can remember this moment of me telling you, because you will get through it, but it is like, oh my God, like what am I going to do? So anyways, yeah, that was a very, very difficult time. At the time, there was three network admins, so we ended up rotating like an 8-hour shift, just constant. One guy would work for 8 hours, and then the next guy would work for 8, just continuous until we figured this out. So it was very challenging. I learned a lot, and needless to say, after that, we did an extensive review of all of our switches to ensure that the proper protection mechanisms for loops were in place.
So that was a real learning moment, definitely. Absolutely. For you. And you stuck it out, which means obviously, you took what you learned and you moved forward. And one of the outlines in the learning outcomes is, are there any specific ways that you approach resolving IT problems? And I think you've kind of clearly outlined that there are steps, and you've isolated it to one area. And sometimes you have to go back to the old-fashioned way of using pen and paper so that you can do the background work and work in that team. I think you said I have 3, Daryl, that were able to work around the clock in order to solve the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of stress, and I guess we need to be careful how much stress we say for these. We may be losing some students here, but really you guys are kind of the end of the road. And I think that everybody else that isn't in IT, myself included here, I'm the recruiter in all of this. And I know for me, Jamie, when my computer goes down, truly I'm in panic mode, and it could be something really simple like the hydro goes out, but it's true. So yeah, you guys are definitely the go-to people. So that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, because it's so real life, and you're right. All the students are going to face that at some point. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
You just have to know that Bryan, you will get through it.
Yeah, sorry. But they'll get through it. Yes, yeah, remember that you will get through it. You heard it from Bryan first. Or from Daryl first, sorry. Bryan, was there anything that you wanted to, from a learning outcome spot, especially when talking about security? I see some questions coming through, and I know that Aaron is going to be addressing some of them, but there does seem to be questions about the security and the approach of security and making sure that the organization is secure and how you might handle that.
Right. So little bit of context probably before we hop in that. So we deal with many clients. So and what's the best way to preface this? Okay, so we're considered what's called an MSSP. So we do cybersecurity services for many clients, anywhere from small to large enterprises that I'm sure everybody actually goes to. Got to leave the names out though in this case. Um, Varying some of these vendors and clients, you're talking 20, 30,000, 40,000 devices that are piping logs into our SIM devices that are getting aggregated. And you would think with all these clients and all this traffic, the team must be massive that manages this. And I hate to burst the bubble, but not as big as you would think. So when we hit like a critical issue, one of the key things, and Daryl kind of talked about this to some extent, is what is the impact to the business and what is the fastest way to get service delivery back to our clients as soon as possible. And whether that means we need to make a drastic change to the process temporarily, we need to get a few people on the phone. It's about getting as many balls in the air in parallel that you can. Don't sit there and go, I'm going into fix mode right now in isolation, and I'm just going to hammer on this until I get the problem fixed. If you need to escalate up to your manager, you need to open a vendor ticket, you need to send a client notification, either get on those things immediately or get somebody else who works with you to help getting these things moving. Because most of your clients and your vendors, you probably are under some type of SLA agreement. For us, they have financial penalties on them if we do not have certain key devices and key hardware up within a time threshold. So not only is the pressure on from a job standpoint, the pressure is on from a financial standpoint. You could be costing an insane amount of money to the company if we fail to deliver. So no pressure, everything's gonna be fine. But that really has to be part of your mindset. So number one, you're not in it alone, even if you're just the on call and it's 2 a.m. in the morning and the phone rang and I guess you need to really take the impact immediately and go, what can I do to get things started? So suppose you get your tickets out, you've got some hunch about what the issue is. Now, hopefully you have some type of documentation platform. We internally, we use Confluence, and it's part of our process with it that postmortems and follow-up change notes on every time one of these critical issues happen are recorded. What are we going to do differently? Where did the process break if it's on us? But a lot of times you're going to find that your client had a change and they didn't tell you about it. And a lot of these relationships are really hand in hand, and you require your clients to be transparent, and you need to be transparent about what's going on. So communication's everything. Like some of our infrastructure, we have a subsidiary company that helps host some of that. Sometimes they perform changes and break our stuff. So it's about trying to like get to the bottom of it as quick as possible. And some of those strategies might involve going into a slightly higher workload for like our security operation analysts and going, hey, our correlating engine's broken right now. I'm going to need you to be manually on this dashboard, and you're going to have to do these ones by hand. And you might need to let that manager know they need to get 10 more people on the deck to start dealing with those alerts and start dealing with that client while we get things moving. There's no shame in trying to get things happening. The worst thing you can do is just to like be bullheaded about it and just sit there and just try to hammer away. You might get lucky. You might solve it in a few minutes and like be like, no worries. I finished this last 3 times. I can deal with these problems. I'm awesome. I'm elite. And you have this sense of like technical, I'm going to use the word arrogance because I do see it a lot, that people believe that they have all these tech skills. And honestly, you need to humble yourself and take like a real learning approach to it. And you're probably going to get a lot more learnings too, especially as you start to cooperate with other teams across other disciplines, because sometimes you lose scope of like the big picture and you're just honed in on this like little piece of the puzzle.
And that's huge. Just going back to my example where we had that network loop. Like it's not as if you could just put as much as a technical person, as much as I'd like it, you can't just put a bubble around me and just let me do my thing. There are the CEO, the executives, they need to know, right? There's huge impact. So being able to communicate and have the ability to translate very technical things to a non-technical manager is a huge skill set to have, because they need to know what's going on. We need to get communication out to the public. We need to get, or to Brian's point, or to his business, like to their clients or to his executive team. Like they need to know, and if they don't know, they're going to be breathing down your neck and asking those questions. So it's critical to have those communication skills.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much for that overview. That's great. And there are some questions coming in, and I'm wondering if, because they are directly related to all of the areas that you're covering, are you both comfortable if we go ahead to some of the questions and you can each respond based on your organization or based on your experience? Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Aaron, did you want me to go ahead and ask some of the questions, or do you want to, you tell me what is best for you?
If you want to, Jody, you can take it. I'm making a list so I can cross them off as you go through them.
Okay,
or
sure.
I can ask them if you want.
If you've got them right in front of you, go right ahead. And I'm kind of monitoring too. So that's perfect. Appreciate that.
Okay, I'll start with I guess the earliest that came in from Hans Deep. Which systematic approaches and diagnostic tools are most effective in finding network solutions?
Do you want to go ahead, Bryan?
To be honest, I use pretty basic set, just really use Netcat a lot, and we use tools like New Relic is kind of like the go-tos. Keep it really simple because we deal with a wide vendor amount of systems, and you can't count on having some special applications that you can install on all these boxes. A lot of times you don't even have rights on them. So a lot of times it's just down to the fundamentals, pulling IP tables, nothing fancy, at least from my end.
On our side, so in previous jobs that we've used SolarWinds Orion as an SNMP manager. So we would add all of our networking devices into that system, and then it would pull through SNMP information on whether device is online or if a port's gone down, that sort of stuff. We're kind of moving away from that. When we were with Brocade, we had Brocade's BNA, Brocade Network Advisor server, which was similar to Orion, and actually I really did enjoy working with that platform. It was really easy to customize alerts. So for example, we run dual power supplies on all of our switches, and also all of our switches are stacked. So I don't know if you guys know what that is, but a stack essentially is, I could take 8 switches and daisy chain them at the back of the switches with special cables. And I can now manage 8 switches with 1 IP. And so if one of the power supplies went down on one of the stacks, it would tell me which switch in that stack was affected, and it was a power supply A or B. And so now that we're with Cisco, we have Cisco Prime, which does similar things, but it's not as, I don't like it as much as I like Brocade Network Advisor. We also use Syslog a lot, Syslog server. So we use Splunk, and Splunk is absolutely amazing. You can feed so much data into it through Syslog, and it's got amazing trending, amazing search capabilities. I can search as far back as like 2012 when we first started using it, and I could do that quite quickly. Other approaches, diagnostic tools. So obviously, like as a network administrator, ping is a huge tool. So I mean, ping's just sending ICMP requests and waiting for replies. But we have a tool called multi-ping, which is actually something that I introduced to RVH, and it's a fantastic tool where you can get an entire, like you could have an Excel spreadsheet of like 1,000 hosts or 100 hosts, and you can import this into multi-ping, and it will ping all of these devices all at the same time. But then it'll also graph it for you. So it'll tell you there's latency spikes, and the graph will allow you could look at it like a 5-minute time or a 6-minute. Oh, I think my power's back on now. My micro just beeped. So like you could look back like a 7-day trend or 24-hour, 48 hours. So it's really good for granular and checking for trending. So I don't have to I could ping a device and go home for the night, come back into the office the next day and see what it was doing over the night. And then there's a similar tool from the same company called Ping Plotter, which we use, which essentially is the same thing. It's just for a single host, but it'll also do a trace route. So you can see if there's, issues in latency between hops and that.
Yeah, maybe I'll just hop on that for a second there. Yeah, like when you're talking about SolarWinds especially, very powerful tool. We actually use a lot of automation built on top of SolarWinds rules just for uptime checks, VM restarts, diagnostics. So it's like I never have to really touch a lot of those things because those are already automated through that platform, which is really powerful. Obviously, they had that huge breach about a month or so ago where they got exploited, but that's software. And I guess on the point about Splunk, I think it's really useful for everyone to get a knowledge of the SIM-based solutions that are on the market. Splunk's one of the leading ones out there. You can look at QRadar, you can look at ArcSight, you can look at Logarithm. Pick one, preferably one that's got some market value still, like Splunk's one of the leading ones there, or maybe even look to the some of the cloud tools like Azure Sentinel. Know what's current. SIM is a very important component to security infrastructure and log aggregation, and being fluent with those tools. Very rarely do graduates come out with a working knowledge in those tools, but there's a lot of free materials out there. You can get a free trial license, provision one on AWS or something and spin it up. The more you know around that stuff, it's going to help, because a lot of the jobs around the kind of Wild West days of just being down on the network level are starting to disappear. And there's like these levels of abstraction with the tools. Daryl is a little bit closer to the network stack than I am on the layers, but as like these corporations and cloud companies continue to grow, it's going to be more about how do you harness these tools that are sitting on top of your networking infrastructure to get in there. And if you have knowledge of how this stuff works, it's what's going to really probably give you an into the industry.
Wow. Great answers. Seems like it was a great question. I do have a couple of others, if I may continue, from Gersimran. How do IT staff determine the level of support needed and urgency of requests? So it's a triage question.
That's a great question. So, when an issue comes in, you have to look at you have to identify the impacts, right? What's being impacted right now? Is it a single user that can't print to the print server? Is it an entire floor that can't print? Is it organizational wide? In my line of work, we have patient entertainment systems for patients, and very important to be able to, first of all, be entertained and to keep in touch with family and all that. But if someone's having an issue with their TV because the network drops down or faulty or something like that, and then there's an entire stack that's been having issues because something like hardware died, like say power supply failed or something like that, you have to be able to say like it's very important for that patient to have that service and to connect with their family, absolutely. But right now, my priority is getting the clinical staff back up and running and operating. So it really just depends on what's the impact to the organization, to your users. And then you kind of just prioritize based off of that. I think, is that the entire question? How do IT staff determine? Yeah, and you kind of get to it all depends on your field of business too, right? Like if you're working for an internet service provider, I mean, especially during COVID times, huge impacts to clients and all that. So you kind of get a feel for what's really important and what can kind of wait. It just comes with experience on the job, I'd say, as well.
Yeah, what you're likely going to find here is that your company already has some type of severity mapping on how things are done. Very rarely are you going to walk in there and you're going to be like, these are the Sev1 issues, these are the Sev2 issues, these are the 3s and 4s, because you're likely not going to have the context or the visibility around what that is. Now, if you somehow in an organization that doesn't have this in place, general rule of thumb, if they're core systems to the business and they're not functional in any state, that should probably be like a severity 1 issue, needs to be dealt with immediately. usually like a severity 2 issue, which is still kind of in that high impact zone. It's like heavily degraded systems, performance is having like a critical impact on operations. And then like your 3s and your 4s are like mild disruptions, but there's workarounds, or there's other avenues, or maybe there's a bit of manual work, but it can wait till Monday, say if it's a weekend issue. And then Sev 4 issues usually kind of like annoying things, maybe like your reports taking 40 minutes to generate instead of 10 minutes, like it can wait till the next week kind of thing. But ultimately I'd look to the leaders in your corporation or business there to really define what that looks like. That'd be a tall order to ask like somebody just coming in. Even if you have a lot of experience, you could provide a suggestion, but context is everything with these businesses. So if you don't have the view on it, be honest about it and kind of take it from there.
Awesome, thanks. And this one's been asked by actually a couple of people. So thank you, Krupal, for asking it first. What steps do you need to take in a workplace in order to maintain older or out-of-date equipment and software?
So great question. So I think it depends a lot on your organization. What you'll find with a lot of products is there's going to be a product life cycle. So there's going to be a life cycle for, say, maybe we have this network switch or this security appliance, and it's going to be supported for 5 years, and then we're going to stop selling it. And then also there's a support end of life for support. So how long is it say Cisco or any of the big companies, how long are they going to support that specific hardware before it's too out of date? And really at the end of the day, it comes down to money. Money talks. How big is your budget? How much can you spend? You can find a lot of smaller to medium-sized businesses might be running on like a Cisco 3550 switch, which is like a really old, still reliable layer 3 switch that you can get a lot done. But that is far, far, far from Cisco's support and life cycle. So very fortunate being at RVH that we have the ability to plan these things out. So one example is our Cisco ASAs. They terminate all of our IPsec VPN tunnels as well as remote access VPN. And we just recently migrated from Cisco 5520s, which are end of life, end of support, to our new 5525Xs, which it took a couple of years in order to migrate all the tunnels. But it's just, it gets marked with a budget, and a lot of that stuff gets done with like at the manager level and above sort of thing. So you have your certain budget, and then we kind of will say, well, we need to get this equipment. This is our very critical equipment. It has to be replaced by X date. And if we don't do that, the risk of that is, X, Y, Z, whatever that device services.
I wish I could give a clear answer on this one, but honestly, it depends. It really depends on the impacts. Budget, definitely one of these things. How long is the contract? Is it with like a client service? Like how long's the contract? Is it coming up? Is it years in? Does the client have the ability to change? Is it internal software? Is it proprietary stuff, or is it stuff that we built in-house? Do we need to upgrade it due to a large vulnerability? Like a potential use case that we encountered was we had some Python 2.7 software, and that Python 2.7 went out of support pretty much at the end of last year. So that stuff became a huge security threat. So that became we can't talk about it. We have to get it patched up to Python 3 for any of those key services. And you just have to kind of get it done. Sometimes, you bring it to your business leaders and they're going to choose the things that matter the most. And the other stuff, you're just going to take that risk on. And you're going to find a lot in IT. It's about managing risk profiles. Is it a system that gets used once a month and doesn't have a track record of breaking down versus something that's used hundreds of times per day? And if it were to go down, it's going to cause like a catastrophic effect across the business. That's really going to kind of direct you in the way you're going to tackle that. But from a perspective of like a student coming in, I think what you should look to do is if you identify something that is at risk like that, talk to your leaders and make sure it's on their radar. You'd be surprised with how many moving pieces in an IT ecosystem that it's hard to keep track of everything. You can have the best documentation, the best communication channels that you think you can have for your business and still miss a small detail. So you could be that hero that sees that that exploit that somebody else missed and bring it up. And worst case scenario, they already know about it. If best case scenario, like they haven't heard of it, it's now on the radar. Maybe it's going to be thrown in the next sprint to get patched up. And we averted a problem proactively instead of waiting until you're in like a fire scenario. And fire scenarios are awful because a lot more errors get made when people are under pressure. Whereas if you got 2 weeks to work this out, it's a lot easier to strategically have an approach, go through the right process, and get ahead of it. So just be proactive, and that's probably the most you should be like looking to do, at least coming in at the entry level.
Thank you. I also have another question that's been posted a couple of times. What are the most common security issues seen in the field?
You want to take that one, Bryan, first, or?
Most common security issues: API keys left in code, static values left in code with like IPs, URLs, emails not being properly filtered out to correct parties, using autocomplete on external communications, leaving ports open needlessly, giving your dev team way too much access to too many things, not following least privilege model across your business, not having a process around keeping your internal architecture up to date, not having a proper patching cycle. I can't put one above the like that's just off top of my head, but I'm sure the list is probably long, to be honest. Daryl, if you got some common ones you run into.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in any organization that you work for, your weakest link in security is going to be your users and their knowledge of security. Like we have a security analyst that works with us at RBH on our team, and I mean it's that important to the organization that we have someone full time that is dedicated to that. A lot of us so I work on the infrastructure team. We all work with security in our mind. But we see lots and lots and lots of phishing attempts and sort of like false emails from the help desk that we need to reset, we need to log in and reset your password and that sort of thing. So things are getting a lot better. There are better tools out there now that can kind of help with that education. And one simple one that I see a lot of organizations moving to is this, I don't know if Georgian College has it, but it's just a little header that says like, this email did not originate from inside the organization. Please make sure that you, you trust this person and that sort of thing. So I think just having simple tools like that really helps. But really it's like, do you have a security program where you're doing, annual training for your staff to say, make sure you don't fall for this phishing attempt, and IT will never ask you for your password, and like, make sure you hover over the link and look to see that if you see a link in an email that it's going to like georgiancollege.on.ca or whatever the website is, and not xyz.123 type of thing, right? Because a lot of phishing emails will pretend to be from a legitimate organization when really it sends you to a malicious site in order to try and infiltrate you. As also too, we take advantage of IDS and IPS systems on our network. So we have our perimeter firewalls are Palo Alto firewalls, and we use their wildfire service, which essentially, if somebody downloads a file, it will send a copy of that file to the Palo Alto cloud, and it will remotely detonate that file, and it will check to see, does it do anything specific to the file structure or to anything that looks bizarre. And if it is, and they classify it as malicious, they will create a signature for that specific threat, and then they will push it out to all the other Palo Alto customers. So it's great in that sense, and also it does IPS for us. So that's detection or intrusion prevention system. So it will actually take action, and an IDS oh my gosh, I'm stumbling over my words, so I apologize. An IDS system will only alert you to something happens. An IPS system will actually take proactive measures to block those connections. So it's amazing the amount of stuff you get coming in from the internet of just like hackers trying to like doing a port scan to see what's there, and the amount of stuff that we see being blocked is just amazing.
One comical one you'd be surprised to see, even in very large businesses, is you go on a Linux box and the root account's still there in defaults, and they haven't been changed. Every user's got sudo, you know, like it's the basics often get overlooked, and you know, you think you're logging everything, and you know, you don't have your syslog getting logs from half of your servers because somebody forgot to do it from years ago and it never got updated. It's often those really small gaps that actually get caught out, and you can have the best solutions to monitor the endpoints, but if the logs aren't forwarding and the basics aren't in place, the rules do nothing because they have nothing to aggregate on. And a lot of these systems are really just built on top of log analysis at the end of the day. So before you walk in there and try to solve the most complex issues, run through your basics and start there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And then you just put a thought in my mind too. And another huge thing that we see is vendor networks. There are certain scenarios where you might have a vendor's network within your own network sort of thing, or a vendor's PC or a server that's managed by another organization that you don't have specific controls on. Like it's not attached to your domain. You can't apply the same GPOs and antivirus and all that sort of stuff. I believe it was the Home Depot breach that happened a few years ago. I believe that was a compromised like vendor device that was on their network that wasn't patched, wasn't maintained, didn't have antivirus, and the hackers were able to take over that device and then from there launch their attacks and steal their data. So
like, this is very interesting. So I'm answering the questions for any students that are coming in or new. I'm answering the questions in order that I'm receiving them. If your question has already been answered, you'll have access to the recording after the session through your co-op coordinators. So you can go back and get all of these amazing answers that we're getting. So I do have a question from
Sorry, if I can just add into that, because I see some of the questions the students are asking and they're being very specific, which is great, because I know it's coming directly from the learning outcome sheet because they want to ensure that they can complete the project part of it. But I think, guys, if you really listen to what Daryl and Bryan are both saying, they have answered. I can guarantee you, I know these inside and out, and they have answered almost every question that is within your project. So I think they've both mentioned you need to think outside the box, think of the steps that you're taking, and really listen to what they've said because they have answered these. So they're not going to come right out and say, it's A, B, C, D, and E, because I think if you've gotten one thing from this presentation, there isn't always an A, B, C, D, and E, because what works for one situation may not work for one. So when you're or for another one. So when you're answering your questions in your project, really think about what they've said, and you can approach it from a different angle. We want to see that thought process. Sorry, Aaron, because I think I can see the questions coming in and I think there might be a little bit of panic in there, but I'm telling you the questions have been answered by both Bryan and Daryl. So think outside the box. Sorry, we'll move forward, Aaron.
No worries. And that's good to know because I don't, I'm not coming from the department. So no, that's great. I will answer or ask though, from Taryn Preet, from start to finish, what are the important considerations when implementing a new computer system? Do you think that one's been answered already, or?
I think that's a day-long webinar is what I probably
that's a pretty involved question.
If Daryl and Bryan, it's a great question, but if Daryl and Bryan have a 5-minute answer, then that's great.
I have a 30-second answer is if you're dealing with VMs or cloud, you should be on a templated based approach and the whole thing should be automated. You shouldn't have to worry about it. You should deploy your image and go. If it's not standardized, you need to ask yourself why it's not.
And I'll sort of from a networking perspective. So when we were fully Brocade in the data center, fully Brocade in all our data closets. And so when Brocade sold their company, what they did is they sold it to Broadcom and then divested the company, where they wanted to keep the SAN switching part of the business. So the data center and the closet switches all went to separate companies. So we identified that as a risk, and we're like, we have to change something. So we decided to go with Cisco. And it was actually probably one of the funnest times in my career, like just like hours upon hours of whiteboard sessions of drawing out what our network's going to look like. So, I mean, it really takes a lot of like many hours of meetings and whiteboard sessions and planning and trying to understand you have to identify what are your requirements, right? Like, what are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to achieve a fully redundant system that doesn't tolerate downtime. We want full redundancy. We want 40 gigs in the core. Like, you have to identify what that is, and then you work with the vendor. You work with Cisco. You work with the different vendors to come up with that solution. And depending on where you work, like Bryan works for a private company that is privately owned, so they have a lot easier decisions with budgets and that sort of stuff versus working for government. We have very strict procurement policies, because because it's a government, we have to be fair and offer the opportunity to all businesses to be able to provide a solution. So I can't just say, I want that Cisco switch and go buy that Cisco switch. I have to put out a request and say, these are my requirements. And I can't say it has to be Cisco, but I have to say it has to be able to support 48 port switches and PoE to power up access points and phones and that sort of stuff. And then we put that request out there, and then we wait for vendors to come in with a response. So if you end up working on one of those projects and you like networking and geeky things, like, it's probably one of the best times you'll have, because it is just a complete geek session on whiteboards and taking pictures to make sure that you know what's going on. So yeah, it's fun times.
Awesome. This next question kind of takes a different bend. What soft skills do you think are most important when it comes to working as a network administrator or security analyst?
I think we kind of hit on it a few times there, but communication is hands down the most important skill. And communication has a few different avenues to look at. Number one, can you speak coherently to your peers? Can you speak to the non-technical folks you're probably going to have to interact with to deliver the message? A lot of times I'll see somebody new come on and they'll try to escalate their first issue, and it's 5 paragraphs long. It's got so much technical details in it, and all it does is create a spin-off meeting because of how much confusion. Need to know basis, keep things simple, understand the audience, don't make assumptions that they know the terminology, and speak about what's important. They don't need to know the minor details about the ports and whatnot. Unless you're speaking to somebody who's in that domain specifically, you can't even make judgments that they're going to have as close to knowledge as you on that. You're probably the subject matter expert in that domain. And communication also has to translate into really good like email etiquette, as well as on calls. Do you know how to document your thoughts in a really structured way so we can follow a very similar approach? Is every notification you send out different? Are we following some kind of templating and style? Is there an approach that all of our team members should be maybe on board with before we kind of move forward with how we're doing things? It's those little details that are going to really boost up your effectiveness. And those people tend to stand out in the company versus you have someone who's always raising issues, and it sounds nice, but a lot of times you don't want to be the person that's just going, hey, there's a problem. You want to be bringing problems up, but you also want to be coming with a set of solutions and avenues. You might not know which avenue to pick, but do some due diligence before you just immediately go, hey, I don't know what to do. Okay, hey, here's what's going on. Here's the impact. I think we can take these 3 avenues. What are your thoughts? And kind of start the conversation like that and kind of go from there. And then as you gain experience, you're going to just get more adept at kind of handling these situations.
Yeah, and I'll just add sort of 2 things just in terms of like soft skill. I mean, I guess one's a soft skill and one I think is just good for anybody in any industry. So the first soft skill I think is important to have is empathy. It will get you so far in your career. Like going back to the example I had talked about earlier with the patient entertainment system being down. From a network perspective, like that is absolutely lowest priority on my plate. Like I have a lot of stuff to do. I'm not worried about your TV not working, but if I have empathy and I can put myself in that scenario, especially during COVID times where that patient is probably in pain or suffering and they want to talk to their family and who wants to be in a hospital, patient in a hospital? Nobody. I mean, I'm only there because I work there, right? I would not want to be there as a patient. And so, to understand that while that's not an important issue in terms of the greater picture of all the hospital has to support, it's important for that patient experience to be able to say, you know what, like I'm going to make sure that at the end of the day, before I leave, like I'm going to go and get that. I know I can't get to it right now, but I'm not going to leave them hanging over the night because they might be an older patient that may not have a cell phone or they can't see very well. And so they like to use the handheld phone on the unit. So, and I think empathy will get you guys so far in your careers, and not just with clients, but also with managers and with your fellow coworkers, right? Like if your boss comes down hard on you, try to put yourself in their situation, right? Like they might be having to send a deliverable to their manager, and like there could be so many things going on. They could be just having a bad day and they inadvertently did something to upset you, right? So I think that'll just help you. It'll go a long way. It'll definitely help you stand out amongst your peers, and as well as just making sure that you have the proper like systems in place at home to kind of de-stress from your work. Because like I'm not on call right now, but if my phone goes off that like there's a fire, like I'm there, like I have to like disconnect the call and I'm driving to Barrie, right? And so in the back of my mind, every time my phone goes off, if it's a friend or my wife or my like somebody just sending me a text message, in the back of my mind, like, is that work? Like I always check my phone, is that work? Like, and you're always going to have that work being in IT. So it's really important to be able to have those systems in place to kind of relax and take time out of your day so that you don't burn out. Because I think what happens a lot of times is we get burnt out and we get stressed out and we don't take that time for ourselves. So it's definitely huge. I mean, yeah, I think that's it.
Erin, we're just getting up to, we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm wondering if we take 5 minutes for another question. I see a lot of documentation questions in there, so I don't know if that's something Daryl and Bryan can speak to. And then maybe just the last 5 minutes, we'll do a wrap up. And if there's any further questions, they can either direct them to myself or Jeff, and we can perhaps reach out to Bryan and Daryl and see if we can get some of those specific answers. But I do think, again, thinking outside the box, guys, listening to what Bryan and Daryl has both said, those have been addressed for your project. So I'm very, very confident, but we'll maybe do one more question to wrap up if that works for everybody.
Sure.
Works for me for sure. So yeah, I do have, I guess, a two-part question. What is the importance of documenting? And I have a troubleshooting question here as well. Just go through a process for troubleshooting a ticket or similar problem. So that comes from Colin.
So it just documentation is huge. Specifically with troubleshooting and tickets, right? Like Bryan had alluded to it before. Like if you have a great ticketing system, you can log that ticket or log that issue with the ticket, and then you can run reports on that and check for trends. And, like you could say, well, we're getting 50 calls a month for this. Well, okay, well, maybe we can come up with a solution to address that. Or specifically within my team, if I've set up a brand new system, I want to make sure that I've got everything documented so that my coworker, if I'm, it's COVID time, but if I'm out on vacation at a country and enjoying some sunny weather, he has all the information documented for that system so that he's not freaking out going like, what did Daryl do? I can't figure this out. So it's super important for trending. It's super important for being able to identify repeat issues that potentially technical solutions can fix. And it's also just really important for your coworkers and staff to have that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I I guess rewind if you're listening to this afterwards to the section where I kind of talked about Confluence, but maybe I'll expand off that a little bit. So it's all about the knowledge base. So how do you get a knowledge base if it's not there? So you have your critical issue that happened Friday night, because that's the way it always happens. I guess tomorrow we're due for an error. So you have your critical issue, you get your service back up. What are you doing on Monday? And this is the key thing. It's after you have the problem, take charge, get a post-mortem meeting going. What actually went wrong? What were the outcomes? What is the process, so we don't run into this thing? If you have 50 tickets in the system over the last 2 months on the same issue, that's crazy. That's crazy. You got to get ahead of it, because and if you're speaking to your managers about it, how do you have that conversation? Look at how much your hourly rate is times those tickets and how many hours you're costing the company thousands and thousands of dollars on X issue. Usually the case itself is there. We're not talking about the one-offs, but if you're seeing the same similar type of thing, a proper post-mortem, what were the fixed steps? What do we need to do going forward? And have those documented into the knowledge base and hold people accountable. Usually the way that we implement it is a ticket isn't closed until a post-mortem is complete and in the user base. If it's not there already, the ticket's not done yet. You got to go back and you got to finish those notes, and those get reviewed. And they actually are part of like our internal compliance checks too. So integrate it into your process the best you can. I know mileage may vary depending on the size of your corporation, but it doesn't mean you can't have nothing. Like, you got to try to set something up, or else you're just going to spin your wheels just doing the same kind of thing. And yeah, that's, I guess, my thoughts on that.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. And you've given us a lot of information. And again, I've said IT isn't necessarily my background, but I'm learning with all the technology and the information you've provided. And I think there's so many big takeaways here, but being able to change, being able to go with the systems, and that there isn't a one size fits all, and every industry is going to have different priorities, and understand what those priorities are really key. So I'm thanking you both, and Jamie or Aaron, I don't know if there's some additional words that you want to say, but I'll leave it at that, because I really do appreciate you coming out.
Well, as an alumni engagement manager, there's always going to be additional words that I want to say. But let me say this. I said at the beginning of the call today that we have 87,000 amazing grads who have incredible experiences and knowledges to share, and I think that was put on display here today. So, on behalf of everybody at Georgian, I want to thank Daryl and Bryan for taking the time out of their day for this, and I do want to let you know as well that on behalf of the association, for your time here today, we will be making a donation to support a student bursary in your honor at the same time as well. So we're paying your generosity forward to a future as well.
Thank you. That's amazing. It was
Yeah, it's
a pleasure
awesome
to be here. It was an honor.
Yeah.
And so if I could ask everybody to smile, we're going to take a very quick screenshot and we're going to get it right this time. So, so smile for the camera and I'll count us down. And let's do that one more time. Apparently I'm not the right person either. Okay, we're counting down in 3, 2, 1. Got it. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. And yes, for the students on the call, the information will be available through your consultants following the call today. Have a great weekend and take.
Right. Thank you again, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much, everyone. Really
Thanks, folks.
appreciate your time
Appreciate it.
today.
Thank you.
Bye.